Good morning everyone, my name is Michelle, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another video. It is Sunday morning and we're going to talk about the Delphi case again today. And I had an interesting question in my Facebook group a couple of days ago. So if you want to join my Facebook group, the link is in the description of all videos. All my links, everything to PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, all that stuff, all in the description box. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and anyway, all there. I've put a little PowerPoint presentation together, so let's go there. Okay, so this was the comment. I'm not going to put the person's name on because I think it's a real name. People tend to use their real names on Facebook. So I remember for a while, I and many others were convinced that Kegan Kline and probably his dad were responsible for the Delphi murders. I was convinced after listening to the Murder Sheet podcast research on it. Then everyone kind of just stopped thinking it was Klein. I can't remember why though. It was before Richard Allen was arrested or even mentioned. Did anybody know why Klein all but dropped off as a prime suspect? I answered that question in the Facebook group. Something quite short saying, well, Richard Allen was arrested, so everybody forgot about Kegan Kline. Sidebar, his name, every time I mention Kegan Kline, people correct me and say it's Kegan. Kegan would be two E's, wouldn't it? It looks like Kegan to me. The young man on the left is Kegan Kline, and on the right is Tony Klein, his dad. I'm going to go into Kegan Kline a little bit here. Now, people who are Delphi OGs will know all this stuff, but I'm going to give the basics to answer this question because there are so many new people to the Delphi case. I think we had some new people when Richard Allen was arrested, and there's been more new people since all this Odinist stuff came out from Richard Allen's defence, or should I say ex-defence, given what happened earlier this week. Alright, so Kegan Kline, who is he? Well, he's a young man, I think he's about 29 now. They're from Peru, Indiana, which is close to Delphi. Kegan Kline hit the headlines, and we'll get into the timeline in a moment, because it became known that he'd been catfishing young girls, including Libby German, before she was murdered, by using this young man's photo here. I mean, the likeness is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. Now, the young man is a male model and has absolutely nothing to do with the case. Kegan was simply using his photos, you know, from Instagram and stuff like that because, well, I don't know, maybe the likeness was so close. He thought, well, I might as well use his photos rather than mine because he has better photos, even though I look really much like him. You can, I'm sure, detect a hint of sarcasm there. Anyway, let's get into the timeline. Now, I robbed this from Navillus True Crime because he had some nice little PowerPoint slides. I'll leave a link to this in the description box. Navillus actually did quite a few videos about Kegan and Tony Klein, kind of in response or just to discuss what the Murder Sheet podcast had been talking about in relation to Kegan and Tony Klein. Because, as the Facebook commenter said, it was the Murder Sheet who did a great deal of research, and it was, I think, because of their podcast that so many people thought Kegan and Tony Klein were suspects. And I will admit, I thought, up until Richard Allen was arrested, I thought that Tony Klein was Bridge Guy. So, as we know, February 13th, 2017, Abby Williams and Libby German were murdered, and the bodies were found on Ron Logan's land, who was also a suspect. His house was searched on more than one occasion. His house was searched soon after the murders, and then there was a search warrant for his entire property. And that search warrant was leaked, or the Murder Sheet podcast got hold of it somehow. So we learnt a little bit about the crime scene from that search warrant. But Ron Logan has since died. He died in 2020. And he was never charged with the girls' murders. But some people still think he's a suspect. Now, this is interesting. February 25th, the FBI raided Kegan and Tony Kline's home. Kegan living with his dad, Tony. Now look at the timings here. So February 25th, FBI raided the Klein home. If we go back to the defence memorandum from Richard Allen's ex-defence, and we just slip in the investigation into the Odinist angle here. Look at the timings here. February 17th, so just 4 days after the murders, the FBI interviewed Brad Holder. Also, Patrick Westphal was interviewed on February 19, 2017. But then it's just 2 weeks later, at the beginning of March, both Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal were eliminated as suspects, and there seemed to be no further investigation about Brad Holder, Patrick Westphal, or any of the other Odinists. And the defence memorandum goes into quite some detail about the amount of people who called in tips relating to Brad Holder specifically. The leads just weren't followed up because, there was just notes on the files saying already cleared or eliminated, or there was no investigation. So it's interesting that August of this year, these Odinist links were re-evaluated by the prosecution. Isn't it interesting? Patrick Westphal said himself he had a 4.5-hour interview, including a polygraph. He gave DNA. The first interview of Kegan Kline was February 25th, 2017. 12 days after the girls were killed. Kegan Kline was eventually charged for 30 counts of child P, and that's what he's in prison for now. In the affidavit for Kline's charges, it was noted that they spoke with him at that time, so February 25th, 2017, about 2 investigations. One, the Delphi murders, and the other tied to Miami County. Now, I think that would have been the masked man who was looking into a girl's house after this young girl gave her address to the Anthony Shots profile. She thought she was communicating with this young man. And then on the very same day that she gave him her address, a masked man appeared at her window. And it was thought to be Kegan Kline. Kegan Kline denied all this and was never charged for anything to do with this instance in Miami County. But anyway, back to the timeline. I do find it interesting, I really do. I'm wondering whether the Odinists were looked at first, but then they came upon Kegan Kline because this Anthony Shots profile was linked to Libby's phone, and as you know, Libby's phone was found at the murder scene. That's how we have the little video of Bridge Guy. So I'm wondering whether they got, the information back from Libby's phone, found this Anthony Shots profile, dropped the Odinist completely, and the focus became Kegan Kline. However, it took them 3 years to arrest him and re-interview him. So August 19th, 2020, Kegan Kline was arrested and re-interviewed. But it took another year and some change to December 7th, 2021, when the Indiana State Police issued a statement on Anthony Shots on the profile, linking it to the Delphi case. 2 days after the Indiana State Police issued this statement linking the Anthony Shots profile and therefore Kegan Kline to the Delphi case, that he did an interview with podcaster Barbara McDonald. He placed the phone, all these phones that were found, like there's loads of devices found. One had been completely wiped. There was all sorts of suspicious stuff, and you Delphi OGs will know all the details about all of these different devices, phones, an iPod. But Kegan threw in this curveball and said that it wasn't just him that had access to the Anthony Shots profile. His dad also used it. He also said that he was with him on the day of the murders. But there's more. Kegan said that Tony, his dad, carried out the Delphi murders, while Kegan waited in the getaway vehicle, which was a red Jeep. So we've no reports of a red Jeep being found anywhere close to the scene. We've heard about purple PT Cruisers, we've heard about smart cars, we've heard about 1965 Comets, but we've not heard about a red Jeep. It's Kegan who brought this into the mix. But the police were taking him seriously because throughout August and September 2022, so this is just like 2 months before Richard Allen was arrested, they did this massive search of the Wabash River. Deer Creek feeds into the Wabash River. To increase the speculation further, on September 19th, 2022, Doug Carter, one of the main police investigators on the Delphi case, flies to Peru and said no deal should be given to Kegan. I don't know whether Doug Carter just got sick of him and knew that he was lying. And then, a month later, October 28th, 2022, Richard Allen gets arrested. So was it that they'd started to look at Richard Allen and then knew that Kegan was lying? There's more lies, but let's do this in chronological order and talk about his sentencing. He was sentenced in July of this year in Indianapolis for catfishing underage victims and soliciting nude images. Was linked to the Delphi murders in 2021, as we've just seen. After it emerged, he had communicated with 14-year-old Libby German in a fake Instagram account, Anthony Shots, the very morning she and 13-year-old Abby Williams went missing and then a day later found murdered. What a coincidence. I can't get over this coincidence that Anthony Shots, a.k.a. Kegan Kline, or a.k.a. Tony Klein, was going to meet Libby at the trails, but before they had a chance to meet, she's murdered. What a coincidence. Anyway, Kegan Kline was sentenced to 40 years for his child P charges. Eventually, he did plead guilty and got the 30 counts reduced to 25. A judge has sentenced Kegan Kline, the Peru man who admitted using the catfish social media profile Anthony Shots and Emily Ann to contact underage girls, to 40 years in prison. He'll also serve 3 years probation as part of his sentence. Okay. Judge Timothy Sparr handed down the sentence Thursday evening, so this is July. Klein is not allowed to appeal the conviction since he pled guilty, but he's able to appeal the sentence, which he told the judge he plans to do. It's really important, days like today, being able to provide justice to the innumerable victims that Kegan Kline impacted, Miami County Deputy Prosecutor Courtney Alwyn said after the sentencing. It's some of the most important work that you could do as a prosecutor, and they were immensely proud. So July 27th, during the sentencing, State Police Commander Christopher Cecil testified. Cecil did the forensic examinations of the electronic devices seized from Kegan's home in 2017, but he claims he was not asked to analyse them until 2020. Is this more laxness on behalf of the investigators into Delphi? They dropped the Odinists quickly, presumably in favour of Klein, and then dropped that until 2020 in favour of something else, someone else, Ron Logan maybe, I don't know. Anyway, Cecil testified Klein's devices had several social media apps and profiles of Emily Ann and Anthony Shots. The Emily Ann profile targeted girls 12 to 18 years old. The profile would then direct the girls to Klein's real social media profile and would ask, "Would you have sex with my dad?" The victims of the Emily Ann account were from all over the country. Cecil testified the Anthony Shots catfish profile was on Instagram and Snapchat. Klein's internet searches included child P terms. Cecil claims investigators were able to identify 6 or 7 underage victims. Which is it? 6 or 7? Anyway, underage female victims. Among more than 100 sexual photos on his devices. When questioned by the defence, Cecil said there was no evidence Klein ever paid for photos or even met anyone in person, that he messaged online. State Police Detective David Vidor testified he began working on the Klein case in 2019. He testified Klein admitted to making the Anthony Shots profile and receiving over 100 photos and 20 videos of underage girls that were explicit. He testified Klein claimed he never shared images with his father. His father did not have access to his phone, and his father did not know much about social media. He's just a massive liar, Tony or not Tony. So he went on to say he did it because he was angry no woman would contact his real dating profile, so he created a fake one. And there's a bunch of information there about the background, so I'll leave a link to this in the description box. But back to Kegan and his massive lies. Shortly after his sentencing, he did an interview with Kevin and Anya from the Murder Sheet podcast. And despite telling investigators that his dad had nothing to do with it and didn't know anything about social media, he made some probably lies. I'm here because of my dad. Kegan wastes no time talking about Tony. He was with me that day. He has crimes against children. Talks about the 2020 interview transcripts and the agents telling him about 2 users of the device. So he claims that investigators told him that there was more than one user on this device. So presumably the other person living in the house who had access to those devices, i.e. Tony Klein. I'm not guilty of all those charges, maybe 7 out of the 25. Cops in Delphi case, he said, don't want to hear anything I have to say. I tried, they don't believe me, they can't corroborate anything I've told them. I've asked 100 times why my dad is not arrested. Well, they went and arrested Richard Allen instead, who the prosecution are going to claim murdered the girls before Anthony Shots had chance to meet them, or Tony Klein, or whoever had chance to meet them. But there's still people talking about Kegan and Tony Klein, thinking that they are more suspect than Richard Allen. So Kegan Kline versus the sketch 1, which is the older man, and sketch 2, which is the younger man. So sketch 1 was released in June or July 2017. The younger one wasn't released until 2019, although that was done first. And that's Betsy Blair's sketch of the young man around 20 to 40 years old that she saw on the Morning High Bridge about 2 p.m. The defence memorandum says that Betsy Blair saw a young man with bushy hair, right, as per the sketch. So do either of those look like Kegan Kline? He's been investigated in relation to the Delphi case, but I don't think he looks particularly like either of those. But does he look more like them than Richard Allen? Kegan Kline, Richard Allen. Kegan Kline, Richard Allen. What about a voice comparison? Again, I've nabbed this from Navillus True Crime.
What the whole thing started was they said that the Anthony Shots account had contacted Libby and was talking to her, which I know 100% it was not me. But I know exactly who it was. The police know, but they don't want to say it in the court.
What do you reckon? How does that compare with Bridge Guy, and how does that compare with Richard Allen?
There's the word show coming up. 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 There's the word show coming up.
Okay, well, what about Tony Klein? People have matched him to Bridge Guy. Like I said, I thought he looked a lot like Bridge Guy. Same build, maybe a bit fatter, but same build, similar kind of facial structure. But apparently Tony Klein's like 6 foot and Bridge Guy is much shorter. The juveniles who saw a man on the trails said that he was 5'10" or maybe less. But what about his appearance? I think he looks a lot like, he's fatter in the face, but looks a lot like the older sketch in my opinion. I'm not saying Tony Klein has got anything to do with this at all. The police have never arrested him. The police have never even named him as a suspect. Presumably he's got an alibi for that day. This is just all out of interest. This is just answering a Facebook comment, you know, looking at the people throughout the 6 years or 5 years before Richard Allen was arrested that have been talked about. That some of you new guys to the case, you won't know any of this. What about Tony Klein's voice? I can only find a little clip of Tony. I found a couple of clips. This is the better one. I've got a link to all of this in the description box. So let's listen to Tony Klein's voice here.
Kind of busy right now. Leave a message and I'll get back with you. Thanks.
Now, some people say Tony Klein sounds more like Bridge Guy than Kegan does. I think that's true. I think he does sound more like Bridge Guy, but to me, again, I don't think so. And Tony Klein has never been named a suspect. He's probably been carefully looked at because of his, you know, the accusations against him, because of his criminal background, you know, he harasses women and stuff like that. Does he have access to the Anthony Shots profile? Yeah, probably. Just a pair of massive weirdos. You can kind of maybe see where Kegan gets it from. But did they commit the Delphi murders? No, I don't think so. Knowing what we know of everything, I don't think so. It's just such a massive coincidence that on the very day that Libby was supposedly planning to meet Anthony Shots, she gets murdered. So when Richard Allen was arrested, I tried to find links between Tony Klein and Richard Allen, and I can't find any. Apparently there's no links between Kegan Kline and Richard Allen. It seems that nobody knows Richard Allen, like the interviews that Sleuth Intuition did with Patrick Westfall. Oh no, I don't know Richard Allen. No one seems to know Richard Allen. Was Richard Allen just this loner who didn't know anyone in a little town of less than 3,000 people? And he just went and murdered them just randomly on the very day that Anthony Shots had arranged to meet Libby. It's just crazy. What a crazy coincidence that would be. Anyway, let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.